Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to talk about miracles. And I think it's a miracle you're here listening, and I appreciate you. So thank you for joining me tonight as we talk about miracles. How do we know the miracles in the Bible were true? How do we know miracles are real at all? What if they're not? How does this all work? So let's talk about it. Miracles are, by definition, strange. They are the intentional deviation from the natural laws by God for his purposes. So, Augustus Strong gives us a really good definition for miracles in his systematic theology work. He says, a miracle is an event palpable to the senses, produced for religious purposes by the immediate agency of God. Even if science had discovered everything that there was to know about natural laws and how it works, it would still not be possible to explain away the miracle. And this is really important because some claim that miracles are just natural occurrences that science just hasn't figured out yet. But that's not the case. And since science observes and studies what the normal, natural laws are, it cannot speak to miracles in any way, either proving or disproving them, because that's not what miracles are. They're not within the natural, normal realm. Now, note, keep in mind that science never proves anything, it just disproves or supports a hypothesis. You can't prove anything through scientific experimentation. If we did not have science and understand how the world normally functions, we would not recognize miracles when they happened. If we didn't understand what was normal, we wouldn't know what was abnormal. Remember our thought experiment. What would you do if you were in God's shoes? If you had created a world and a people and you wanted to get them a message, if you wanted to talk to them, well, how would you do that? In the Old Testament, we know he talked to the people directly and they flipped out. They just absolutely lost it and said, never do that again. We can't handle it. Just talk to Moses and give him the message. We can't handle this. So he speaks through a person then. Okay. Well, how would you validate your message as God? How would you let people know that this message is from me and that what that person's saying isn't for me? How would you validate the message? Well, there's really two ways to do it: prophecy or miracles. And prophecy really is a kind of miracle, but we'll keep them separated for now. God used prophecy to authenticate his prophets and their messages. What that means is God would give the message to his people, and to validate this prophet, he would give them a prophecy and say, okay, well, this is a message from me because here's what's going to happen. And if that happens, you know that this is a legit prophet. Now, if a prophet ever got a single thing wrong, it totally invalidated him and anything he said. So prophecy was a pretty strict standard. And it was not something that people could fake. You can't fake prophesying over and over and over again. We see that happen today when people try and fail miserably. So God used prophecy to authenticate his prophets and their messages, but Jesus didn't have time for that. He couldn't authenticate his message. Well, I mean, he could. He could prophesy and authenticate his message for later people to understand that he was legit, but he needed something more immediate to let the people know around him who he was and what was going on. He needed to be able to prove right then and there that he is who he says he is. So miracles are a far better method for his purposes. Let's examine what would happen historically if a person like Jesus performed amazing miracles. What would happen? Well, obviously, crowds would be attracted. People would hear about it. They'd want to see more. They'd be interested and they would follow him. And people would be talking about it. They'd be talking about him. And there might be controversy over how he does them. And maybe there'd be a record of these things happening. So let's look. Does history support this? Is this what happened with Jesus? Do we see evidence of this? We do. In the Gospel of Mark, about 40% of the narrative includes miracles. The accounts in the Gospels corresponding to the miracles of Jesus also appear different than those fanciful, mythical miracles that were found elsewhere in literature. It wasn't the same. You can't say this was myth. It was never written as myth, it wasn't written in that style. They're presented with a certain sobriety. R.C. Sproul calls it a profound commitment to the sanctity of truth. That's how these miracles were written about. They were written as serious events. Take, for example, what Peter wrote. He wrote, "For we did not follow cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty." They clearly claimed the veracity of their claims as eyewitnesses. They even staked their lives on it. Craig Keener, who is a scholar in this area, I really like him, he notes that claims to Jesus' miracles occur in the very earliest literature about him. It wasn't added later. The miracle claims were there from the very beginning. And even the critics don't dispute that. They can't. Mark, special material in Matthew and Luke, John, Acts, the epistles, Revelation, and non Christian testimony from both Jewish and pagan sources all attest to Jesus' miracles. Keener wrote that. Jesus was well known as a miracle worker, at least as much as he was known as a teacher or a prophet. And he's accepted as a miracle worker by those in this field. Regardless of how they feel about miracles in general, it was well known that Jesus was regarded as a miracle worker. There's no disputing that. And so let's look at the big miracle. What was his biggest miracle? The resurrection. The entire Christian faith hinges on the veracity of that one big miracle. Was he who he says he was? Was he God? The one miracle that nobody could ever doubt was the resurrection. So there was a little prophecy here. He told his disciples that he would be crucified. Let's see, quote, "When Jesus had finished all these things, he said to his disciples, 'You know that after 2 days, the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified.'" That is Matthew 26, 1-2, the ESV. Jesus told them he was going to be crucified. And this wasn't the first time that he predicted his death. Jesus also predicted his resurrection. Quote, "And as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples, and on the way he said to them, 'See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified, and he will be raised on the third day.'" He predicted exactly what would happen. That's in Matthew chapter 20, verses 17-19. Other predictions that Jesus made of his death and resurrection are Matthew 16:21, Matthew 17:9, 22-23, chapter 26, verse 32, Mark 9:10, Luke 9:22, John 2:18-22. It was multiple places. Okay, so he warned the disciples of his death, and he also gave them hope in his resurrection. And this prophecy, if incorrect, would have disqualified him right away. It would have disqualified him as having any authority. And so the resurrection is completely vital for a lot of reasons, not least the salvation of believers. In order to have a resurrection, you have to have a death. And some argue that Jesus never really died on the cross. Well, this is just not possible. If you've seen my Easter video, you know that this is not possible. The Romans were really good at killing, especially by crucifixion, which they reserved for the worst of the worst. Sean and Josh McDowell list 10 reasons why we can be sure that Jesus died. So here's their reasons. First, Jesus' murder was preceded by so much brutal torture that the crucifixion was just the culmination. He was whipped, beaten, kept from sleep, given a thorn crown, and he collapsed on his way to the site He would have lost so much blood. He would have been extremely weak. Another reason that we can know that Jesus died is that crucifixion keeps you from being able to breathe, which results in asphyxiation. I'm not a fan of that word. Asphyxiation. Third, when they pierced Jesus' side at the end, it went through his ribs and pierced his heart. And what they say is blood and water came forth. What that is serum separated from clotted. It showed that he had already died, pericardial fluid. Fourth, Jesus realized he was about to die and he called out to God the Father. Fifth, the Roman soldiers were responsible for his death and they would have been very skilled at making sure their job was done because their life was on the line. This is why they broke the legs of those who had not yet died. They didn't have to do that with Jesus because they knew he had already died. They're good at recognizing it, and then they pierced his heart to make sure. 6, Pilate ensured that Jesus was dead before releasing his body to Joseph of Arimathea. He sent a centurion to verify his death. 7th, Jesus' body, he was wrapped in like 100 pounds of cloth and oils and spices and placed in a sealed tomb until the third day. Even if he hadn't died from the previous torture, even if he hadn't have died from the asphyxiation of the cross, he would have died from lack of food, water, medical help. I mean, he wouldn't have survived. 8th, experts have examined the account and acknowledged Jesus' death on the cross. I believe it was even examined in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA. 9th, Tacitus, Josephus, and other non-Christian historians all wrote about Jesus' death. And then last, early Christian writers like Polycarp and Ignatius, they all attest to Jesus' death. And don't forget that Pilate had ordered guards to stand at the tomb and for the tomb to be sealed. There's no way that Jesus could have survived that. Now, keep in mind that this resurrection was unique in the ancient world. Scholar N.T. Wright notes that it was not even permitted in myth. Resurrection was not just being saved from death and going on to live a life and eventually dying. That would be kind of resuscitation or being raised from the dead, like Lazarus, but it was death's reversal. It was completely different. It involved embodiment, and it was unique to Jesus. Jesus' resurrection also assured Jesus' promise to one day resurrect all those who belong to him. And when he comes again, without this resurrection, all would be lost. Christianity never would have existed. It would have just petered out. When Jesus was killed, if he hadn't been resurrected, nobody would have talked about it afterwards. It would have just been yet another failed Messiah. There were several who had claimed something, died, and then the movement died because there were no miracles or anything to talk about. The fact that Christianity even exists today also proves that the disciples of Jesus truly witnessed his resurrected body, that they spoke to him, ate with him, and enjoyed his company with multitudes of others, including 500 people at one time. Had that not happened, we wouldn't be here today talking about this. These witnesses died for their beliefs. People may die believing a lie, but they won't die for something they know to be a lie. And if this had been made up, those disciples would have known it. They would have been the ones to make it up, but they didn't. They died for this. No doubt Jesus did exactly what he said he would. Jesus died on a cross, a violent and miserable death, but he defeated death by resurrecting on the third day. Further evidence leaves even less doubt in my mind that Jesus died and resurrected on the third day. At that time, testimony of women was not allowed in court. Women were considered unreliable sources. But the Bible records women giving the initial report of the empty tomb. No one would have fabricated that. If they were making this up, they would not have said that women were the witnesses. That just shows it's true. They would have written that men were there first if it was made up. Also, if there had been any way to produce Jesus' body, any way to disprove the resurrection, someone would have done it. There were plenty of people who did not want Jesus' followers to have been right. The way the enemies of Jesus responded to his resurrection proves its veracity, its truthfulness. Rather than claiming that Jesus had not resurrected, his enemies tried to say his body was stolen. If they could have produced his body, they would have rather than attempt this refutation. Then there was the fact that the grave clothes were left. That shows the body was gone, but not stolen. The linens were folded up. Remember, there was about 100 pounds of cloth and spices on Jesus' body. Now, keep in mind, too, that touching a dead body was unclean to the Jews. Carrying a dead body around would have struck some attention, especially a naked dead body. And then you got to remember that there are Roman guards whose job and life depended on getting this right, on not letting anyone steal the body. And then you keep in mind that Jesus appeared to people afterwards. He appeared to people individually and in groups at least 12 different times, and at one time up to 500 people at one time. Given all that, I think it's pretty solid evidence that Jesus not only performed miracles, but performed the biggest miracle of all. I am so glad you joined me for this. I really hope this helps with any questions or doubts you may have had or heard. Guys, faith is not blind. The evidence is there. It's easy to find. I'm sure you're not the first one to have whatever question it is you've come across. So dig deep, do your homework, and join me next time. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you coming.